Good morning, everyone. This is Bill Giannone, and I'd like to welcome you to this morning's CREST webinar. The topic of today's conversation is how much is enough? Labor and equipment issues solved. What we'd like to do today is just have a casual conversation about something that is a kind of a nagging point for a lot of owners at all points during the year, and I think we can try to put some perspective on this difficult topic and maybe try to lighten the mood a little bit when we're starting to think about such things. Every owner's struggle is very simple. It's trying to balance your need for staffing and equipment while trying to make sure that you're staying stable and you're planning for the future. It's very difficult to be overreactive, but it's also a very urgent need sometimes. And a job or two or a week or two tends to drive us to the point where we want to make a decision, and we want to make sure that we balance those decision-making processes with what's really good long-term for our companies. At the bottom, I state that it's always important to focus on the money. Again, a lifetime ago, I spent 25 years on Wall Street, so finance is really my background. And I'm very, very key all the time on the availability of money and how to utilize that money for its best use in your company. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're going to go over some terms that I used to use in my old world of finance, and they're just as applicable for you guys today in your everyday business. I'll just make it really easy and simple for you. The struggle that you guys go through every single day is you have to analyze the value of spending money against the return that it will produce. This is called a cost benefit analysis. Again, on Wall Street, this is what we do basically every day of our lives. We analyze the investment against what we expect the return to be. Now, do any of us know what the return is going to be? Very rarely. There are some instruments that you can invest in, like bonds, where you know that over a period of time you're going to receive a certain amount of return. Bank account similarly. But when you're investing in stocks or any kind of other instruments where the price goes up or down, you really don't know to a degree of certainty what your return is going to be. So you're guessing a lot of times, you're doing a lot of analysis. It's very important to do this analysis. Now, I know I sound like a broken record, but the only way to do proper analysis is to have data. So if you're a company who hasn't started to gather data on your projects, on your personnel, or on your office, then what we're going to talk about today is basically a wish list for you, because you really can't utilize many of these ideals until you have the data. So if data is something that you're currently weak on, my recommendation to all of you would be start going back into the CREST website, look for some of the webinars that we've done before on collecting data, and start collecting that data so that 3 to 6 months from now, you're going to have a better idea of just how to do this cost benefit analysis. Within the analysis, you'll notice on the graphic that what you give in and what you put in is your cost. In most times that's dollars, but we also want to do cost benefit analysis based on other resource implementations and investments. If it's going to take us 3 or 4 people committed to doing a certain project, we have to figure out not just the dollar amounts of those personnel, but we have to figure out the loss to the company of their ability to do other work. So it's not just always a dollar thing, it's the overall cost and investment that you put in. Your benefit is what you would get out in return. Once again, not just in dollars. Many times guys will sit there and say, well, I don't have the time to put in new systems or to put in a good process for my mitigation response. Well, if you don't put that time in and you don't dedicate time and effort towards building it, even if it means lowering your revenue for a short period of time, then what you're going to get back in return is you're going to continue to get inferior response and inferior quality of your mitigation efforts. Sometimes you'll get a much better response if you put the time in, which won't necessarily always equate to dollars and cents, but it might equate to things like better client retention, more referrals from those clients, or just less hassles and collecting the money quicker. So the dollars might be the same, but your overall company mood might be a lot better, which in the long run is much better for you to grow your company. So you see, you have a cost that goes in, you have a benefit that comes out. And the difference between those two is what we call return on investment, or ROI. For those of you who have heard me speak in the past, ROI is a very big topic for me. Whenever I'm asked to analyze a company's investment, whether it be in marketing or whether it be in production or labor and equipment like we're talking about today, a very, very important final aspect of whether or not to pull the plug for me usually ties itself into the return on investment. When does it become a good investment? And there are many things that go into that. It's not just the dollars and it's not just what you're getting out, but it's also the time frame that's required to see that return. You know, for many of us, if I said to you, give me $100, I'll give you 150 back in a month, you'll jump on that. That's a pretty reasonable short time frame to get a really good return. But if I said to you, give me $100 and I'll give you back $500 in 10 years, now you're going to think about that, because not having that $100 might cause you to not be able to do some other things in your business that over time might have turned into a lot more than $500. That's what I mean about doing a cost benefit analysis and analyzing a return on investment. Again, guys, these are Wall Street terms that everybody uses out in the real world every day for our businesses. So when you're evaluating your true return on investment, or ROI, we need to think about a lot of different things. I just gave an example before about, do you want the $50 in a month or do you want the $400 profit in 10 years? Well, that's part of what we're going to analyze here. You need to analyze your current and your short-term needs. Do you have things coming up that are going to require you to have to use cash? If you do, that's going to affect your decision, because we all know cash on hand is the most important factor when making short-term decisions. So if we're going to make staffing and equipment decisions, I don't consider those short-term decisions. I consider those more of longer or medium-term decisions. So we need to make sure we understand our current and our short-term needs, especially as it relates to cash. We might have other short-term needs, like we might need a new truck, which would supersede being able to afford to buy a new piece of equipment or several pieces of equipment, or hiring more staff. So we need to weigh those. We also need to look at our regular fixed costs. If our regular fixed costs right now are pushing our ability to make a profit, we don't want to take on additional fixed costs in the line of staffing, or we may want to keep cash on hand as it relates to buying new equipment. So these are things that what I call are mitigating factors, things that will make you decide differently than what the obvious answer would be. Right? We're renting equipment on every job. We know we should have our own equipment. We'll get our money back. But if we don't have the money to lay out for that equipment right now, then we might just have to keep renting equipment for a short period of time. That's one of those analyses. Our expected results. Are we going through a very short-term rush of business, or is this the new normal for us? So we're going to look at some of those things. We're going to see, what are the expected results of hiring another staffer? What should we expect to get out of that? Are we going to get better productivity? Are we going to do more work? Or are we just going to have more people doing the same amount of work? We need to look at that. Other needs in the company, I mentioned before, if we need to buy a truck, that's something we need to take into account, because we need to prioritize our needs, not just be like a 6-year-old and say, I want, walking through a toy store or a candy store. Alternative options. We always need to study, what else can we do? So that's always the thing that I kick back when clients of ours or Crest members come to me and say, what can I do about this? Well, we always know what the obvious answer is many times, but sometimes we have to explore and dig a little deeper and say, what else can we do? So I always like to respond with 3 or 4 different courses of action, because one single course of action is usually the most obvious one, but it's not always the best course for us. Sometimes we have to retrain our brains to think differently and to think outside the box. And then finally, we need to always be cognizant of our future plans. As with anything in life, if we have big plans for the future, the most important aspect of that is saving and having funds available for those future plans. So if you're 6 months away from deciding that you're going to move to a new location, and you're going to need to purchase that location, and you're going to need to outfit that new location, and it's going to cost you sizable amounts of money. Well, you can't be using today's money if part of that money is supposed to be used for tomorrow's longer range future plans. So all of those things have to be explored in order to make a really, really sound observation and decision. Okay, let's start with addressing your labor. We're going to talk about that first, because more than any other topic, when it comes to utilization and when it comes to return on investment, I get more questions about staffing. And I'm going to be giving you a lot of general information, but just remember, guys, everybody's company is unique. I think that's one of the advantages of the Crest Network, is that we don't treat every company that it's like it's the same. We look at each company individually, and we try to set up models that best reflect your needs and your wants in the future, but also the realities of what you're dealing with right now. So all of the advice I'm going to be giving here and some numbers I'm going to throw out, remember, they're very general numbers, and they're based on what I would consider consistent trends in your business. We're going to talk about some of those trends coming up. Which one are you? Are you on the overstaffed street, or are you on the understaffed street? Very rarely will I ask a restorer that, and they'll tell me, well, I'm really good. I'm perfectly staffed for what we're doing. That's usually not how it works, because the nature of our business is many, many times we don't have a steady flow of business from week to week or month to month or even quarter to quarter. We'll have peaks and valleys, so it always inevitably feels like we either have too many workers or not enough workers. So I suspect that most of you have had this feeling where you've been both overstaffed and understaffed in the same month, especially those of you guys in the northern part of the country. Maybe it didn't happen this particular winter season, but usually in the winter seasons, we get really swamped for weeks at a time due to some sort of polar vortex or freeze, only to have to turn around and then the phone doesn't ring for 3 weeks. So we overstaff ourselves to try to get through the peak and the rush, only to find ourselves with too many staff members 2 weeks later. So it's a very, very difficult balancing act. So we have to resist the temptation to make snap decisions on staff without taking into account the factors around why we think we need more people or why we think we're overstaffed. We have to analyze a few things. So my best advice to you guys is to stay balanced. Always try to look at both sides of the coin when it comes to your labor. And I know that this is hard for an owner to hear because it's their money, but I'm a big firm believer in make your decision one day later as opposed to one day earlier. And by that concept, I mean, if you make your decision one day early, you may not have explored all possibilities. If you make your decision one day late, you know you've exhausted all different avenues. And when you do make your decision, it's the one you should have done yesterday, then you know it's the right decision. So I know that that costs money to do that, but in the long run, it provides a little more stability and balance to your business. And in the long run, that's what your staff, your clients, and ultimately you do need. It's important to use data and trends to determine your goal staffing number. There's a number that you should have not only in your head but on paper that should represent your target staffing, not just out on the field in your production department, but also in your office as well. We're going to go over a lot of different things that you should be looking at to help determine those numbers. But let's remember, let's use data and trends. The data and trends I want you to look at include looking at the number of average monthly jobs you've had over the last 3 to 6 months. 3 months might even be a little short, But if you look at your average monthly job numbers over the last 3 to 6 months, it'll give you a pretty good idea if you're suffering through a peak or a valley, or is this your stability number? Maybe you've been operating for 2, 3 months and you went from doing 15 jobs a month to now you're doing 20 jobs a month on average with the same staff that was doing the 15, and you've just kind of been putting your head down and grinding it out. And now that you're looking at the data, now you're realizing, hey, you know what? This is the new normal. This is what I can pretty much count on to be my stable number. That's a really big factor in knowing if you want to make that change. You also want to look at the flexibility of your current staff. If you're not a huge company that has 30 or 40 employees, but you're a company that does, a dozen to 15 jobs a month, do you have what I call flex staffers, guys who can go out in the field when necessary, but when they're not in the field, they can also provide you with some other tasks, like they can do work in the warehouse, they can fix equipment, they can provide you with some administrative duties in the office, they can help supervise other areas. If you've got flexibility in your staff, then you've actually got reasons to not have to ramp up as quickly unless you know that they're spending most of their time out in the field other than doing their other tasks. You need to analyze the current effectiveness of your marketing efforts. Again, without real data, it's really hard to know if your marketers are making headway. Yes, the jobs ultimately become the benchmark and the measuring stick for all marketers, but that's over a period of time. Maybe you've just brought a new marketer on, and in the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 2 months, you've realized that the phone is really ringing a lot more. It hasn't resulted in jobs as of yet because some of these phone calls are for things that you're not doing. Well, it doesn't mean the marketer is not doing his job. He is. He's getting the phone to ring. He just needs to go back to those marketing lead sources and refine his pitch to them and refine the things that your company can do. But getting the phone to ring right off the bat is good. Understanding how effective your marketers currently are is really important. Maybe you've gotten quiet, and maybe it's because your marketers aren't really pushing themselves. So at this point, should you be laying off staff, or should you be kicking your marketer in the butt, getting him right back out there, which could result in the next couple of weeks of the phone getting back to where it was? So you need to make sure you're analyzing your marketing efforts all the time. As you all know, Dick is a big proponent of constant supervision and monitoring of the marketers. And it's not because marketers are lazy people. It's just because marketers are the type of personality that are very friendly and they're very outgoing and they're not very detail oriented. The best marketers are relationship people, and they're really not people who want to sit down and fill out paperwork quite often. But you need to get that. You need to get that data out of them, and you need to speak with Dick or watch a couple of the webinars on how to analyze that data. But it's real important, guys. Make sure you stay on top of what the current marketing efforts are. And then you need to finally analyze how often you're calling in temp labor. Many of us don't want the quote unquote overhead involved with having our own crews, and we might have 2 or 3 guys who do the majority of the work for us, but when we need additional help, instead of having 6 men in our production crew, we might keep 2 or 3 and constantly hire outsiders. So we're basically utilizing temporary labor as a full-time worker, but paying them in 1099 or through another company, so we don't have all those additional burdens. I'm not here to judge for you whether that's good or bad for you. That's a personal decision that you make. I just want to warn you that when you do that, it does have a negative impact on your company culture. The guys working within the company structure will sometimes take exception to the fact that there are people there working every day who aren't real employees, or from time to time may not be showing up because they get pulled from their temp agency to other projects. And it does not help for the cohesion and the camaraderie within a group. The other thing it does is, if you can't get the same temps all the time, it definitely weakens your consistency on the project. You're not capable of constantly putting out a superior product because you've always going to have people there who don't understand your product or your culture, and they need to be brought along. So it will slow you up slightly. It will change the culture. Again, if you're doing it for financial reasons, it makes perfect sense to not take on the extra burden, but don't let that financial reason, if you can afford it, override the negatives that will come with it. So just understand that. But all things being equal, if you're deciding whether to keep using temp or to hire full time, if that is an option, then you need to look at the frequency. You need to look at the data. Okay. I'm going to try to simplify it for you, but just understand again, this formula I'm going to give you is a very, very basic formula that I've used over time because the formula allows for you to make money when you spend money. I don't want you to just jump on this and say this is gospel truth. All of those other factors have to be taken into place. But when you decide whether you're going to increase or decrease your staff, I want you to look at the following general formulas for increasing and decreasing. If your temp workers have worked more than 25 hours per week in 3 or more weeks in the last 2 months, then financially and for every other reason, it makes sense to hire a full-time worker in their place. If you haven't utilized temp labor to that extent in the last couple of months, then continue to use temp labor. There's not enough work and there's not enough demand for you to bring somebody else on. You won't recoup that additional financial burden to your company. Now, I don't say 40 hours and I don't say every week because that would be a clear and obvious decision. If you're hiring a full-time temp, you should have your own staff member there. The reason I use 25 or more for 3 hours over the last couple of months, or for 3 weeks rather, over the last couple of months, is because that's a trend that's telling me that you are pushing the limits of your staff. There might be other jobs in that window where you're deciding not to bring on the temp labor, but your own staff members are working really hard and really long hours and possibly even overtime hours. And I didn't even get into the analysis of overtime. I'm just doing an analysis of temp versus permanent. Obviously, if you've got 3 men on your staff and they're all working 60, 70 hours a week, you should be replacing them with full-time workers so that the work gets done during regular business hours instead of overtime hours and gets done by more people so it gets done quicker and I guarantee you more effectively and more cleanly. So this analysis is really just to show you that if you're working that many temp laborers on that many jobs, you're probably having weaknesses in other areas that would be able to cover a full-time cost. At worst, you're going to break even. And I can almost promise you by the time you get done, you're going to be making money even if the job amounts stay the same. So that's a real general number, but remember that. Now, we have a number for the opposite as well. If you're overstaffed and you're trying to figure out if you truly are overstaffed, here's a good number. If your staff have worked less than 30 hours in any 3 weeks over the last 2 months, then you probably should be cutting staff. If your staff is working less than 30 hours in a week, that means you don't have enough work to go around for them full time, and they're basically working 4 days a week. Well, if they're doing that often, then you can't get rid of one staff member and push that additional burden onto the rest of your staff. Now, guys, if you're 2 men and yourself, and that's your production response or your mitigation response crew, then these formulas don't make sense. I'm talking about guys who have 4, 5, 6, in the case of some of our Crest members, a dozen, 15 staff members doing production work. So let's understand that I'm not talking about the guys who operate out of one vehicle and have a couple of crew members. I'm talking about a reasonable company that's doing $1 million plus in mitigation that might have 3 crews and you're deciding whether to bring on a 7th or 8th person or whether to go down to 5 or 6 people. That's kind of what we're gearing towards here. Okay. Again, very general ideas. We need to understand what our goals are. If your guys are sitting around and you've only got them working 25, 30 hours right now, but you just hired 2 marketers and they're really making good headway, then I would hold off for another month before I'd think about terminating any staff members because you could have an immediate upturn. So understand, everything's interrelated here. We're going to move on to your equipment needs, because the equipment needs have different aspects to them that can make or break you in terms of your overall financial capabilities. Okay, it's very fun when we see pictures like this. And I always ask, how big is your warehouse and how big is your ego? Because those two things usually dictate how much equipment somebody gets. And as somebody from Wall Street who spent 25 years analyzing not just risk, but use of capital, these pictures always drive me crazy. To many people, this picture is a very impressive picture. First of all, it's a beautifully spotless, clean warehouse. But look at those shelves stacked to the brim with beautiful equipment, ready to go out to a job. Okay, so to many restorers, this is a great picture. This picture as well, the traditional picture that goes on most of your websites. Guys, let's roll every piece of equipment we've got and put it out in the parking lot, and I'm going to climb to the top of the building and take a picture. Well, it's a very impressive picture. But to some of us, including myself, I get a very visceral reaction to this. First of all, if you've got this much equipment sitting in your warehouse, you've got too much of equipment. If this is sitting in your warehouse, it means it's not out on a job making you money. And that drives me crazy, because in this picture alone, we are talking about tens of thousands of dollars of equipment. There's a possibility in this picture, there's over $100,000 of equipment sitting there. What could you and your company do today with $100,000 in your pocket? Because remember, this company's probably got projects going on. So the equipment that's not sitting here is out making them money. This equipment is making them no money. So that $100,000 is basically sitting in a drawer and you can't access it. So what could that money be doing for you today? That, to me, is always the overriding equation when it comes to equipment. I get really, really upset from companies that need to have enough equipment in case they had a huge flood or a huge storm. Guys, portable equipment's available in every city and every location in the country. Crest has multiple resources for you to be able to get your hands on this equipment within 24 hours. If you ever had a job that required this much equipment, I would highly recommend that you utilize the resources available to you from others and not have this money sitting on the side. Yes, on that one job, you would have recouped some of the cost of having this equipment around. But unless you can tell me that you're going to have a job that's going to require this much equipment every single month without fail, then I'm going to tell you that I've got 10 different places for you to put your money that can be much better for you. And I know that for some of you, this might be, trying to close the barn door after the horses have left and you've already got this much equipment. Well, we're going to address that going forward as well. How much is too much? I have a really, really simple answer to that. Have enough to cover your work, and that's it. That's enough. Whatever your average number of jobs are that you run concurrently, that's how much you need. Let's do really, really simple math here. If you're a company that's really successful in mitigation and you do a job a day, that's 30 jobs a month. So let's just assume you're doing a job a day. The equipment stays on for 4 days or so. Let's also assume that you're going to have to take an extra day to make sure the equipment's clean, the filters are changed and whatnot. So let's just say that equipment stays on a project and is only usable for a project every 5 days. So how much equipment do you need? You need enough equipment so that it could be on at least 5 jobs. And then I'll even grant you that you'll need a little extra equipment for slightly larger jobs and for the times when your equipment is down for repairs and maintenance. So let's just say you need enough equipment to staff 7 projects at a time. So what would that be? The average project might be 2 or 3 DUs. The average project might be, 6 to 8 air movers. So what are we talking? 20 DUs, 50, 60 air movers. Let's throw 20 scrubbers in there. 20 60, and 20 is enough for you to do a job a day. At an average of $4,000, that's $1.5 million a year of business. And the amount of equipment that I just listed for you, I can promise is probably less than what all of you already have. So ask yourself, are you doing 1.5 million with the equipment you already have? If you've got twice that amount of equipment, you've got enough to do over $2.5 million worth of business. Okay, that's simple analysis. I know that's overly simple, and obviously business does not come to us a job a day. We get rushes where we'll get 5 or 6 jobs in a 3-day period and then have nothing for a week. I understand that. I'm just giving you an idea that if you've got 100 DUs and 500 air movers and you're only doing 20 projects a month, you are extremely oversupplied and over inventoried. Okay, let's do some analysis. Once again, if we have data, if we're gathering data from our projects and we understand that every single project, we should know how many air movers, how many DUs, how many scrubbers, how much extraction was required on every project. We have to have those numbers available to us so that we can do our proper analysis. Let's analysis what we do. What's the count of each type of equipment? What's the average days of your project? If you're doing your proper analysis on your projects, you'll know your average project lasts 4.2 days, whatever that number is. And then you need to take into account the age and condition of your current inventory, because we need to make sure you have stable equipment. If your equipment all has 10, 12, 15,000 hours, your DUs, and you're getting near the end of their usable life, this formula doesn't work. If you have brand new equipment, or if you got equipment that you're properly maintaining and you're taking care of, then this formula should be good for you, okay? So let's make sure we have that data first, and then we can move on to the ROI calculation. Here's my simple numbers I give to everybody. If you've rented an air mover or an air scrubber on more than 3 projects in the last 6 months, or if you've rented an LGR on more than 5 projects in the last 6 months, then you should be able to buy new pieces of equipment. I have a little asterisk in red that says does not count one-off large projects. Do not count any projects that would require you to have enough equipment to fill a football field. Those would be one-offs. I'm talking about in your general everyday business. If you're doing work and you're renting air movers or scrubbers more than 3 times in 6 months, or LGRs more than 5 times in 6 months, then you should buy new equipment. Now, why did I come up with those silly numbers? Let's just do some simple analysis. An air mover in most markets is between $25 and $30 a day for rental. In most cases, you can buy air movers for in the neighborhood of $300 to $350. So for most of you, your return on investment, your ROI, when are you going to start making money, is going to occur in and around the 12 to 15 day mark for air movers. Scrubbers, it's actually going to be a little better. You can buy 500 CFM scrubbers for under $1,000, and you can get upwards of $70, $80, $90 a day, depending on the market you're in and the price list you're using. Hopefully you're using a custom list. Those ROIs are going to be closer to 10 to 12 days of return on investment. So if you're renting them on 3 or more projects in 6 months, that means you're getting those pieces of equipment out on average about 12 days. You're renting equipment for 12 days. You could have put your own stuff out for 12 days. So your ROI, and I like on equipment to get your money back in 6 months. If you can get your money back in 6 months, it's a great investment. So that's why I said if you can do it for 3 projects. Now, LGRs, the return on investment calculation is slightly different. These newest DryMaxes run around $2,000. You could get them a little cheaper. You get them, as low as $1,500 if you're going to buy in bulk from some of the major distributors. But in most cases, you're only getting between $70 and $80 a day for the regular DryMaxes, and for the extra large DryMaxes, you can get upwards of $100 to $120 a day. But those are going to cost you more like $2,500, $2,600. Generally speaking, the ROI on an LGR is 20 days. So I said, if you're renting more than 5 projects in the last 6 months, which would be 20 days of LGR rental, now you've got the ROI in your favor. That money you're laying out could be better used to get your money back. Okay. I understand that in the rental market, you're not paying the $75. And in this case, my ROI calculation is based on that full amount. But what I'm saying is that if you get your money back in 6 months, then you're going to have a profit at the end of every single year, and you're not putting yourself at risk of utilizing those funds for bad things. If you buy equipment and you want to buy these brand new DUs because they're smaller, and you want to buy the Air Max fans because they're flat and low profile and the guys like them because they're lighter, but you're not getting them out, that's a waste of funds, and you could utilize that cash for other things. I'm talking about just making sure that we understand if we're renting a lot, we might want to think about purchasing, but we need to have those numbers. We can't say it feels like I need more equipment. We really have to have the numbers. Conversely, if you have not rented equipment in the past 6 months, you need to look long and hard at your inventory, and you probably need to investigate the concept of possibly even selling off some of your inventory. On Facebook, there are several different restoration marketplaces where guys are constantly buying and selling equipment. And it might not be a lot of money, but if you can pick up a few $100s for used dehumidifiers, or package an entire grouping of fans and air movers, and you can get a chunk of money, and you can use that chunk of money for other things in your company, that's what I call a good redistribution of resources. I'm not saying you give them away for $10 a piece, but I'm saying if you can get reasonable money out of your inventory, and you haven't rented, so you're overstocked, do some analysis. Figure out what the most amount of air movers or DUs you've had out at any one time over the last 6 months. Keep that amount, keep a small percentage, maybe 10% more for emergencies, and then get rid of the rest. Guys, it's really important to understand, when I look at that picture of your inventory in your warehouse or out in your parking lot, that's cash. I'm looking at dollar. And you can never, ever forget one thing. Cash is king. No matter what happens in your company, if you've got cash available to you, that's the most valuable, powerful asset you can have. You could have the best workers in the world. You can have great marketing. You could have terrific processes. And you could be doing a ton of business. But if you don't have cash available to execute your plans, or to be flexible enough to be able to mobilize to a loss, or to be able to handle bringing on some additional staff for a larger project, or to be able to keep your subcontractors happy, then nothing else is going to matter. I've worked with a lot of companies in the past that have been extremely successful. And I believe I've even told some stories about some companies that were so successful that they nearly went out of business. And that's unheard of. But what ends up happening is the company gets really big really fast. And when you grow a little too fast, you end up using a little too much money in order to grow. And that shortage of cash puts a strain on the entire operation. Think about it this way. If you're taking in $50,000 a month and your profit is 20%, that means you need to spend 40,000 to take in that 50,000. And I'm not talking about gross profit. I'm talking about overall operating your company. Well, we all know that collections take at least 30 days for most of us, if not 60 days. So let's just take a worst case scenario and say 60-day collections. Well, in order to do $50,000 a month of business, I need to have $80,000 of cash available, because I'm going to do the business and not collect any of that for 60 days. So my float, as we call it on Wall Street, my float, or my cash reserve requirement, is $80,000. Well, take that business that was doing 50,000 a month and now have them do 500,000 a month. And yes, I've worked with clients who have had that kind of growth over a couple of year span. Well, you go from a company that needed 2 months of $40,000 expense. Now they need 2 months of $400,000 expense. So you go from a cash requirement of $80,000 to a cash requirement of $800,000. That is not something that gets built up from just that 10,000 a month. To build up 10,000 a month to go from 80,000 to 800,000, you'd have to save every penny for 6 years. And I'm talking about a company that did this growth in 2 years. So it's virtually impossible to sustain growth without cash. So every decision we make when it comes to personnel, when it comes to equipment, when it comes to moving to another warehouse, when it comes to expanding our business, when it comes to vehicles, or when it comes to any other expense we want to incur, we need to understand that we can only spend money when we are confident that our return on investment is going to justify that expense in a short time frame. We can't put something out there that we're investing in that's going to get us money back in 5 or 10 years, because 5 or 10 years from now, we could be out of business. We need to understand this reality. It's very, very difficult for most companies because we just assume if we're making good money doing 50,000 a month, we're going to make really good money times 10 if we do 500,000 a month. But without understanding the cash requirements, that really can be something that can put us out of business. I've seen it happen. I've worked with companies to help them avoid it happening, but inevitably, we always fall prey to our worst instincts rather than our best instincts. So I want you to understand that. I also want you to understand that if you want any assistance whatsoever with this analysis, this is something that Dick and I do every day currently for Crest members. We're constantly analyzing data. We're constantly looking at yes or no decisions and helping owners navigate these fields. This is really, really something that I can't stress enough. If you're not very adept at doing your own data analysis and making your own financial decisions, or if you are someone who has made a decision like this in the past and it didn't work out for you, I urge you to reach out to Dick and myself. This is something that we do all the time. This is something that the Crest Network is designed to help with. Yes, I know that the acronym says that we're a commercial restoration education, support, and training network, but more than half of our current Crest members are utilizing the services of the Crest Network for their everyday business, not for their commercial business. It's really important for you to know that, because I think sometimes we might think, well, I don't want to reach out to them because it doesn't have anything to do with commercial. I just want you to know, guys, we are here for you. We want to be able to help you. We want to educate you on being able to understand these kinds of decisions. When you can make them yourselves, your company is going to have much more stability, much more balance, and much more potential for long-term stable growth. For us at the Crest Network, that's the most important thing that we can offer you guys, the ability for you to enjoy long-term stable growth. On behalf of Dick Wagner, I'd really like to thank you for joining us. I gave you guys a bit of a break today. We didn't go the full hour as we have been for many of our previous webinars. I really want to thank you for spending time with us today. And I implore you and encourage you, if you're not doing it at the moment, please start gathering that data. You can see in every aspect of your business how important it is to know the details of your business. I want to thank you so much, and I want to wish you all the best, and enjoy the rest of your day, guys. Bye-bye.